every act of union is an act of revelation. Carl Jung. He doesn't speak it, but something inside him trembles when he draws close. The air thickens, the world fades, and suddenly he isn't only a man reaching for a woman. He's the sum of everything he's hidden from himself. Intimacy, to him, isn't just touch. It's confrontation. The moment he enters closeness, he also enters his own unconscious. Many men believe they crave the body, yet what they truly crave is permission to feel. He was taught to chase success, to dominate, to perform. But in the quiet after desire, when his guard dissolves, the deeper truth surfaces. He wants to be seen without armor. The physical act becomes the oldest language of the soul, where words vanish and archetypes speak. Behind his confidence hides the ancient boy who was once told to be strong. He carries that command like a scar across his spirit. When he meets a woman's tenderness, the boy stirs. She is no longer only herself. She becomes an image, an archetype, the living face of the Anima, the inner feminine that Jung described as a man's bridge to the divine. Through her, he meets his own heart for the first time. But the psyche doesn't yield easily. As she welcomes him closer, he feels two forces fighting inside. One whispers surrender, the other whispers control. This conflict is the silent war between the masculine ego and the longing for union. In Jungian terms, it's the battle between persona, the mask he shows, and shadow, the self he hides. When he steps into intimacy, the mask cracks. He feels exposed, not only before her, but before his own truth. What a man rarely admits is that this moment terrifies him, not because of rejection, but because closeness disarms his entire identity. For a heartbeat, he isn't the achiever, the protector, or the stoic. He becomes human, aching, soft, uncertain. And if the woman beside him carries depth, she can sense it. The tremor beneath his stillness, the breath that falters not from lust, but from recognition. He's looking at himself through her eyes. Intimacy is the mirror he cannot escape. In that mirror, every unhealed wound flickers to life. The mother who was distant, the first love who left, the shame of not being enough. These ghosts linger in the nervous system of every man who has learned to measure worth through control. When he feels genuine connection, those ghosts rise, not to punish, but to be witnessed. The body becomes the stage where forgotten emotions ask for redemption. If she touches him with presence, she awakens something sacred, remembrance. He remembers what tenderness feels like before it was shamed out of him. He remembers the innocence of wanting to love and be loved without a mask. Yet this awakening is double-edged. With every surge of closeness comes a current of fear. The fear that he might drown in her acceptance, lose his boundaries, disappear. Jung called this participation mystique, the primal merging of selves that can either heal or consume. To love deeply, a man must walk that razor's edge between union and annihilation. When he leans into connection, part of him dies, the part built on pride, independence, and emotional distance. What is born in its place is humility, and humility feels like loss until he learns it is freedom. In her presence, he realizes that power was never control. It was vulnerability courageously offered. There's a reason why after moments of true intimacy, many men fall silent. It isn't boredom or detachment, it's integration. His psyche is recalibrating. The rational mind struggles to translate what the soul has just experienced. The silence is sacred. It's the sound of the ego bowing to something greater. Women often misread this quiet as emotional absence, but in truth, it is reverence. He's standing inside his own cathedral, learning a new language, stillness. Inside that stillness lies a confession he can't articulate. It says, "I don't know how to stay open without losing myself, but I want to try." This is the invisible threshold every man must cross to evolve from desire into devotion. When he crosses it, intimacy stops being performance and becomes prayer. The physical merges with the metaphysical, the ancient dance of opposites seeking wholeness. Jung believed that the soul longs for unity more than pleasure. Pleasure fades, unity transforms. For a man, true fulfillment arrives not when he conquers a woman, but when he meets the feminine within himself through her. Each encounter, if conscious, becomes initiation, a small death of ego followed by rebirth into authenticity. The deeper he allows himself to feel, the more real he becomes. But most men resist that depth. They fear the flood of emotion waiting underneath the surface. They've seen fathers retreat, peers mock vulnerability, society reward indifference. So they construct distance, physical passion without emotional exposure. Yet even in that guarded passion, the psyche whispers. It says, "This isn't what you truly seek. What he seeks is resonance, the feeling of being known without explanation." The body is only the doorway. When a woman senses this, she holds immense power, not the power to manipulate, but to reveal. Her presence can either invite him into truth or push him deeper into hiding. If she honors the moment as sacred, she becomes midwife to his transformation. The man begins to trust the feminine, not as danger, but as mirror and guide. That trust changes everything. His touch softens, his breath steadies, his eyes, once guarded, begin to reflect tenderness rather than hunger. In that space, the polarity between masculine and feminine dissolves into oneness. The Jungian journey completes a small circle, from separation to connection, from performance to presence. Yet this is only the beginning. After union, the real work begins. The work of integration, of carrying the lesson of intimacy into the daylight of ordinary life. Most men wake from closeness and retreat into mind again. Few stay open long enough to let the experience rewrite them. Those who do begin to sense that love is not emotion alone, it's expansion. Each encounter with genuine intimacy stretches his capacity for empathy, patience, and self-awareness. The man who once feared vulnerability learns that feeling deeply does not weaken him, it anchors him. The archetype of the warrior evolves into the sage. The body becomes temple, the act becomes meditation, the woman becomes mirror of God. And when he finally understands this, something quiet but irreversible happens. The next time he reaches for her, he doesn't seek to possess, he seeks to participate. The energy shifts from taking to giving, from proving to being. He no longer asks, "What do I get?" but "What can I reveal?" That shift marks the birth of consciousness inside desire. The transformation Jung called individuation, the integration of shadow and light through relationship. So when a man truly connects, he isn't simply inside another body. He's inside his own soul, finally willing to see it illuminated by another's warmth. After closeness, the silence feels heavier. She may wonder why he turns away, why his warmth fades into distance. But inside him, a quiet storm brews. The act that united their bodies has stirred something far older, an awakening he doesn't yet understand. For her, intimacy was connection. For him, it was exposure. She felt safe, he felt seen. And being seen, for a man who spent his life behind masks, feels like standing unclothed in front of his own soul. His first instinct is retreat. He tells himself it's nothing. He blames exhaustion, distraction, work. But beneath these explanations lies a tremor, the realization that something inside him has shifted. Jung would call this psychic activation, when a powerful emotional experience summons the unconscious to the surface. In simple words, a man's soul begins to speak, and the voice of the soul is not comfortable. It is disruptive, demanding, unrelenting. It whispers truths he'd rather not face. He feels both longing and fear. Longing to stay in that space of closeness, fear that it will dissolve his control. This is the paradox every man carries after intimacy. The craving for union collides with the terror of being changed by it. To him, vulnerability still equals danger. The moment after connection becomes the battleground between love and survival. His body remembers trust, but his mind rebuilds walls. What he doesn't know is that this withdrawal is not rejection, it's regression. He is temporarily pulled back into the familiar patterns that once kept him safe. The ego reasserts itself, whispering, "Be careful. Don't feel too much. Don't depend." This defensive reflex isn't cruelty. It's the psyche's ancient instinct to preserve identity. Jung saw this as the ego's fear of dissolution in the face of transformation. And transformation is precisely what real intimacy demands. The woman, sensing distance, might internalize it as her fault. She wonders if she did something wrong, if his silence is disappointment. But what she's really witnessing is the masculine soul in crisis, torn between evolution and escape. When a man touches true intimacy, it doesn't only open his heart, it cracks the walls around it. What leaks out first is not love, but everything that has blocked love. The shame, the grief, the unresolved pain. Before he can embrace her, he must confront himself. He may try to distract himself, scrolling through his phone, diving into work, avoiding her gaze. Yet no distraction fully works. The memory of her eyes, her breath, her presence haunts him. He feels her not as image, but as energy. Something within him keeps replaying the moment, not for pleasure, but for meaning. He doesn't know that this looping is the psyche's way of processing symbolic experience. The unconscious is trying to decode what just happened. What did I feel? Why did it matter? Who am I now? At this stage, his emotions appear contradictory. One part of him aches to return to her arms. Another resists it violently. He might even pick small fights or withdraw emotionally to regain balance. But these defenses are not against her. They're against the flood of feeling she awakened. In Jungian terms, the anima has entered consciousness, stirring both fascination and fear. The feminine inside him has been touched, and now the masculine ego must adapt or suffer. This is the point where many relationships fracture. The woman interprets his coldness as disinterest. He interprets her emotional need as pressure. Both are wrong. What's really happening is alchemy, the burning process of integration. To endure it requires awareness. If she can stay rooted in calm, she becomes his mirror, not his judge. Her steadiness tells his nervous system, it's safe to feel. Slowly, his defenses begin to soften again. Deep down, he doesn't want to vanish into detachment. He wants to understand why something so beautiful also feels terrifying. He senses that she holds a key to his wholeness, but that key also unlocks his pain. The last time he felt this open, perhaps it ended in loss. The psyche stores every heartbreak as warning, never again. And so even when love arrives, the warning still echoes. He hesitates, afraid that surrender means repetition of old suffering. Yet the only way out is through. Jung taught that the soul's healing begins when we face what we've been avoiding. So when he finally allows himself to look inward, to name the fear instead of fleeing from it, something softens. He realizes that her closeness didn't threaten his strength, it revealed his humanity. The feminine energy he fears is not weakness, it is wholeness. It invites him to feel without losing himself. As he processes, a strange gratitude begins to emerge. He starts seeing her not as someone who disrupted his peace, but as someone who revealed his truth. That shift changes the dynamic entirely. Instead of viewing connection as a test of performance, he begins to sense it as a mirror of consciousness. He asks silently, what is this moment showing me about myself? That question marks the birth of awareness, the first sign that he is evolving from instinct to insight. But the journey is slow. A man doesn't open his emotional body overnight. The walls were built across years, layer upon layer of conditioning and survival. Each act of closeness becomes a chisel strike against those walls. Sometimes the blow hurts, sometimes it liberates. Through her presence, he learns to hold complexity, to be powerful and tender, steady and feeling, masculine and open. The dualities stop fighting and start dancing. And this is where love deepens into consciousness. It stops being an exchange of pleasure and becomes a dialogue between two souls translating each other's wounds into wisdom. She touches him not just with her hands, but with her awareness. He receives her not as possession, but as reflection. Together they create the space Jung called the temenos, a sacred container where both egos dissolve and the self emerges. In this sacred container, he experiences something rare, peace. Not the peace of escape, but the peace of acceptance. He doesn't need to hide, impress, or dominate. He simply exists, fully seen, fully human. The same closeness that once terrified him now becomes medicine. What once felt like loss of control now feels like release from isolation. This is the beginning of integration, the inner union Jung believed all relationships secretly aim for. By the time he reaches this awareness, his presence changes. He listens more, his touch slows, his gaze softens, not from fatigue but from recognition. He understands that real intimacy is not what happens in the body, it's what awakens because of it. The physical act was never the goal, it was the ritual that opened the gate. The true journey begins now, when he carries that awareness into life, into love, into every quiet moment where the soul whispers, "Stay open." And if he's brave enough to listen, he discovers the truth that every man who loves deeply must face. Intimacy is not something you do, it's something you become. When the storm of emotion settles, a quiet clarity begins to dawn. For the first time, he sees himself not through the haze of desire or fear, but through the steady mirror of reflection. The woman is still there, but now she is no longer just a figure of affection. She has become a symbol, an archetype that calls forth his unfinished self. In her presence, he sees what he could be if he stopped defending, stopped performing, and simply allowed himself to exist. This is the stage Jung described as integration, when what was once hidden no longer needs to hide. The man begins to notice the movements of his inner world, the subtle rise of shame, the flicker of tenderness, the ancient voice that says, "Be strong." Instead of silencing those voices, he listens. What he once called weakness, he now recognizes as depth. What he once dismissed as confusion, he now names as complexity. He realizes that true masculinity isn't built on control, it's born from consciousness. The capacity to feel and remain present inside the feeling, that is strength. For years he equated stoicism with maturity, but now he understands that numbness was only armor. Beneath it, sensitivity has always been waiting, not to overpower him, but to guide him. When he allows himself to feel, he doesn't lose his edge, he gains vision. Each encounter with the feminine, outer or inner, is an invitation to expand. Yet expansion requires surrender, and surrender feels like death to the ego. So his growth comes in waves. Openness followed by withdrawal, tenderness followed by resistance. He begins to notice these rhythms without judgment. They are the breath of his psyche. Inhale connection, exhale solitude. Balance returns not through perfection, but through awareness. Sometimes he sits alone, remembering the quiet between words, the unspoken understanding that passed like light between two souls. That memory doesn't torment him now, it teaches him. He sees how intimacy was never about possession but revelation. It revealed the distance between who he was and who he is becoming. The old patterns of conquest and control no longer excite him. They feel hollow, like echoes from a world he's outgrown. In their place rises a new kind of longing, not for more experiences, but for meaning within them. He wants to love consciously, to move through relationship as through sacred art. He begins to study his emotions the way a monk studies scripture. Each feeling becomes a verse, each silence a page. Through this devotion, the soul slowly rewrites his understanding of love. Jung wrote that every man carries within him the image of woman, the Anima, who guides his connection to the inner world. When he denies her, he becomes rigid, one-sided, and restless. But when he befriends her, life begins to speak through intuition and empathy. The world gains color again. He starts noticing beauty where he once saw nothing. The way sunlight touches her hair, the way words linger in the air, the way quiet moments seem alive. He learns that love's truest expression isn't dramatic, it's attentive. To truly see another person is an act of reverence. The same awareness he once used to analyze now becomes the awareness he uses to understand. His mind no longer interrogates emotion, it protects it, like flame cupped in the hands. This new relationship with the feminine also changes how he sees himself among men. The old conversations, competition, conquest, status, feel strangely small. He doesn't reject them with contempt, he simply outgrows them. He senses that many men live behind walls of silence, yearning for the same permission he has just given himself, to be whole. Sometimes he speaks about it quietly, testing his voice in the company of trust. When he does, others listen, not because he's preaching, but because he's living proof that strength can be gentle. Integration is not a one-time victory. The psyche moves in spirals, revisiting old fears from higher ground. There are days he still closes off, moments when the old reflex of retreat returns. But now, instead of disappearing into numbness, he notices it and breathes. Awareness transforms defense into dialogue. He asks himself, what am I protecting? Most often, the answer is simple, a wound that finally feels safe enough to heal. In this awareness, the world begins to mirror his inner shift. The woman who once represented mystery now represents partnership. Their connection no longer oscillates between fusion and separation. It moves toward presence. He can hold space for her emotions without drowning in. She, sensing his groundedness, opens more. Together they learn the rhythm of conscious love, give and receive, speak and listen, merge and return. The beauty of this stage is subtle. There are no fireworks, no grand revelations, just the quiet majesty of two souls walking side by side. He understands now that love is not meant to complete him, but to remind him of his completeness. Every moment of closeness is sacred not because it erases solitude, but because it makes solitude meaningful. The sacred and the ordinary merge. Her laugh, his stillness, the smell of morning coffee, all become small ceremonies of being alive. He also begins to feel compassion for the parts of himself that once sabotaged connection. The fear, the control, the pride, these were not enemies. They were frightened children guarding the gates of the heart. He doesn't banish them, he comforts them, and in doing so, he discovers that healing is not the destruction of defenses, but the understanding of why they were built. The world outside may never notice his transformation, but inside, everything has changed. He no longer measures love by intensity, but by peace. He no longer chases emotion, he listens to it. He no longer runs from vulnerability, he stands with it. This quiet maturity becomes his new power, invisible, steady, magnetic. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming whole, is love's hidden goal. Through every connection, the psyche leads us back to ourselves. The man finally understands that intimacy was never about losing himself in another. It was about finding the parts of himself that could only awaken through another's presence. Now, when he looks into her eyes, he doesn't see escape or salvation. He sees reflection, two consciousnesses meeting, learning, transforming. And in that recognition, he finally understands what the mystics meant by union. Not two bodies becoming one, but two souls remembering they were never apart. He smiles softly, not with triumph, but with peace. The journey that began with confusion and fear ends not in answers, but in awareness. Awareness is the real intimacy, the moment when mind, heart, and soul breathe together. He no longer asks, "What does love give me?" He asks, "What does love awaken in me?" And the answer, whispered from the depths of his being, is simple and eternal. Everything. There comes a silence between two people that no words can cross. It is the silence after understanding, after vulnerability has been seen and not judged. This is where a man realizes that what he sought in a woman was never merely affection, but recognition. The moment his interior world meets another's light and doesn't collapse. In Jungian language, he has touched his anima, the living image of soul within him. She isn't the woman before him, but the archetype she awakens, the unseen feminine that teaches him to feel, to yield, to belong to something larger than control. When a man truly connects, he isn't losing himself. He is finding the forgotten half he exiled when he chose strength over sensitivity, logic over longing. Most men fear that meeting. To let someone see their softness feels like dismantling the armor they spent years forging. But if he dares, he discovers that his softness was never weakness. It was his bridge to meaning. In that surrender, the war between masculinity and emotion begins to dissolve. The relationship becomes a mirror. She reflects what he denies. He reflects what she yearns to be met by. Each reaction, each distance, each tenderness is a dialogue between their unconscious selves. He realizes that love is not the merging of two bodies, but the union of two inner worlds attempting to make sense of themselves through one another. This is where real maturity begins. He no longer seeks to possess. He seeks to understand. He no longer hides behind silence. He listens with his whole being. And in listening, he becomes more human. A man who has met his own depths can hold another without the need to dominate or disappear. He sees that presence is not measured by performance, but by stillness, by the courage to remain open even when emotion rises like a storm. The more he accepts his shadow, the less he projects it onto the one he loves. He stops fighting ghosts and starts protecting peace. In Jungian terms, this is individuation through relationship, two souls becoming mirrors of consciousness, helping each other grow into wholeness. He understands now that intimacy was never meant to complete him. It was meant to reveal where he was still incomplete. And through that revelation, he becomes capable of genuine connection, one rooted not in need, but in understanding. The sacred irony is that the more he accepts the mystery within himself, the more transparent he becomes to love. No longer a performer of affection, he becomes its vessel. He learns that devotion is not in grand gestures, but in quiet attention, in the way he listens, the way he stays, the way he holds space for another's truth. As he integrates his inner feminine, his outer actions soften. He speaks less, but means more. He touches without ownership. He leads without pride. His strength becomes invisible, not loud, not heavy, just steady. This is what Jung meant when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." For the man who learns to see himself through love, fate is no longer a sentence. It becomes a choice. A choice to live awake, to love awake, to meet the sacred within another and bow. So the journey ends quietly, not in conquest, but in comprehension. He walks back into the world, no longer searching for proof of worth, but carrying the calm knowledge that he is already whole. And when he meets another soul, he no longer asks to be completed, he asks to be seen. Because the highest form of intimacy is not about bodies meeting. It is about two consciousnesses saying to each other, "I see your shadow. I see your light. I choose both." That is love. That is awakening. That is the union of the human and the divine within the heart of a man.